So what an exciting day. We're here for Treaty Talks with Tomorrow's Leaders, an opportunity for our students across the treaty territory to ask questions and have some discussion with our Ogamas. So we're going to start off the morning going live from the grade 8 class at B. Dobbins School in Segma back with Ogama Ozamaniki. So we'll pass it over to your guys' classroom and send it to the chief for some opening comments. And then you can take it away with any questions you have from your class as well there, Becky. And if not, just send us some messages or let us know if you guys have any issues or you need some help. All right, take it away. Miigwech.
Okay, I guess before we begin here, if we can extend a good morning to everybody across the treaty territory area. So if you can all say Mino Kajep, to everyone, all at once. Okay, everyone. Mino Kajep, from Sumuk Kanishnabe. Mino Kajep, Kinoya, Gilligan, and keep an answer different cause. Mquad Dodum. Sumuk Mumpy and Gondry. Get you in the monkey don't run. I'm Spotted Thunderbird. I'm of the Bear Clan. I'm very happy to be here today. And for those who know me as Alan Pizal and Imki, I grew up here in Sagmuk. I grew up with the teachings and the guidance of family, community, parents, and I bring with me today my bundle. My bundle contains medicines and gifts that were provided to help me along in my journey. I want to share with you, I know we have a couple of questions here this morning, but I wanted to share with you this morning something of significance that I did while taking on this responsibility for our community of Sumuk. When I came into one of the first things that I was told was the importance of ceremony. So we did ceremony as leadership to guide, support, and direct us in what we had to do. And one of the things I did as well too, it was my first year, first couple months coming into this responsibility after the community, was go to Boating. Last year we had commemoration for the treaty around this time. And when I went to Boating, I went into ceremony. I went into ceremony because that is what Spirit had guided me to do. And in there, I went there because I was not certain of what we do moving forward. Because as you know, our community is very involved in mining, extraction, resource extraction. I know there's some who may feel somewhat conflicted about that. Should we be doing that? So I went into ceremony last year. And I went into the lodge, the sweat lodge, with the specific question that, are we doing, is it still acceptable today? I asked that question of the spirits of our ancestors, the spirits of those chiefs who signed the Robinson-Huron Treaty in 1850. The response I received in there at that time was that yes, but know, be aware and understand your responsibilities. And further saying, don't get greedy. I didn't understand exactly what all of that meant in terms of the getting greedy part, but things will start to unfold over time in terms of how we respond to what we're experiencing today. When our ancestors and our chiefs signed that treaty, it was with an intent to share the land, to share the resources. Because at that time, there were resources being taken without acknowledging us as Mishnabek the inhabitants of the land. So Chief Shigwakong's petition over time the need to acknowledge us as people in the territory, that they were taking resources from the land and they had to acknowledge and share that. There was a copper mine in Bruce Mines, and they were also mining just north of Boateng, Sault Ste. Marie. And that led to the Robinson Superior Treaty. But in this particular area, they were taking resources. And we acknowledge that they are here and that we have to seek a means and a way to address that issue of cohabitation. But you'll be asking similar questions in terms of what is a treaty. So that is the spirit and intent of why we have a treaty. And the spirit and intent of the treaty is important to me because we have our legal provisions of the agreement. We have our legal approaches to that relationship. But what's important is understanding why our chiefs signed the treaty. And that was to acknowledge and share. We will have, we'll be inviting questions from yourself, from the class here in Godobin and Ziluk this morning. And what I will do is share my bundle here. When you ask the question, I'll provide you with the fan that was gifted to me during this responsibility to Ziluk. So the first question, who's asking the first question? Okay, just introduce yourself to the people. Just come up front here.
Joseph, the teaching class. My question is, what is a treaty?
In its simplest form, a treaty is an agreement, a written agreement, acknowledging the relationship between two groups. There are a number of treaties throughout the world, and in our particular situation, it was an agreement between two nations. We are the Anishinaabe of the North Shore of Lake Huron. And the agreement that we had signed was with the British Crown of the day, before Canada even became a country. And it was signed in 1850. We had 21 principal chiefs come and sign that treaty, and as well as additional representatives from each territory, each community. The Robinson-Huron Treaty was signed between the chiefs of the North Shore of Lake Huron, from Boateng to Perry, from Sault Ste. Marie to Perry Sound. All of our communities in between, or all of our bands in between, as they were referenced. The treaty was a relationship from the Crown, represented by an individual named Benjamin Robinson. He was representing the Queen at that time. But he signed the agreement with the chiefs, and they gathered at Sault Ste. Marie, Boateng, September 9th. And when and there was a couple of other communities, it's been said that not all communities were there. But the agreement was signed with the British Crown. And that treaty outlined lands that would be for specific use of the communities so that we can continue our forms of governance. It also outlined our rights, our Indigenous rights, allowing us to continue to hunt, fish, gather, without being imposed. However, we've seen that over time that we've been with that part of the relationship. Excuse me. So when we signed that agreement with the British Crown, before Canada became a country, and over time Canada did become a country, and then in 1982 there was constitution of repatriation to the citizens of nation state of Canada, and that document outlined, reaffirmed all agreements, which included our treaty, Robson-Huron Treaty. So our treaty is a legal document outlining our relationship to Canada, and first the British Crown and subsequently the country of Canada. Second question?
Julian Disnikosh, and my question is, can that treaty be broken, or does it ever end?
Which way? Treaties are developed for certain purposes, for different purposes. There can be treaties around the world outlining the relationship between nations in relation to land, in relation to peace, and most agreements will have a clause in there to outline what is to happen if the agreements come into dispute. Our treaty does not have such. When I say that they outline responsibility, they outline whatever happens, if something happens when there's a dispute, it's called a dispute resolution mechanism. How do we resolve that dispute? And in the absence of that, when there is a clause that will outline a beginning and an end to that relationship, often one party will walk away from the other. And in this particular case, with the Robson-Huron Treaty, there was no end clause. There was no clause for that treaty to end. The intent of the treaty was to outline the relationship of cohabitation between our people and the settlers of the day, so that we can coexist. It will outline how we live on the land together. Should that treaty end, the question is what happens? Where do they go? Because it was providing permission for them to occupy the land alongside us. So, can a treaty be broken throughout the world? There are treaties that have ended, but in our particular case, there is no provision for the end of that treaty. There is no provision for an end date saying that the treaty is going to end by a certain date, and the treaty was very clear in outlining the intent of cohabitation. So, this treaty that we have will exist for as long as we're cohabiting, living together in the territory. Third question? Please turn to the
one question is, what are our treaty rates?
The treaty has provisions that will outline our rights in relation to acknowledging our forms of governance in our respective communities. It set aside lands that we would be able to exercise that. However, each and every community continues to exercise the rights to hunt, fish, gather in the territories. And in Sagmook, many of you may think of Sagmook as just being the land in which was set aside as reserve land, where we see from Spanish to close to Massey on the south side of the Spanish River. However, our territory actually includes all of the watershed of the Spanish River, which goes all the way up to Biscoe Chasing, which we call the height of land. And originally, Sagmook was 5 communities. They were represented in these respective settlements, right from Biscoe Chasing, Potmissing, which is near Benny, north of Sudbury. So we're following the Spanish River all the way down. And there was also a settlement at Birch Lake. And then here in Sagmook, we had a community. We also had a community over to the east in the Killarney area called Beaverstone. So these are all settlements of Sagmook. And these are all areas that are protected within a treaty of our right to harvest. So this is what the our rights entail in terms of the allowing us to continue to hunt, fish, and gather in our territory. So again, the territory of Sagmook, our community, includes the watershed of the Spanish River and its tributaries, which includes Savo. So some of you, many of you, I've seen at the what we now call Neogabo for standing. And then that's the fall harvest site. We go there every year to exercise our treaty rights, to harvest, to hunt, and gather. So our treaty rights do include that, and they've also been affirmed in what I referenced earlier, the Constitution of 1982. So I encourage you to continue to exercise your rights as Nishnawbe. And we have a fourth question.
Okay, my name is Nicholas. My question is, how long will it take to RHT court decision, and how much money will each member be entitled to?
That's a very complex question, because the Robinson Huron Treaty Annuities case is still before the courts. And that will be determined by the amount of resources that were extracted from the territory over the last 100 years. You can imagine that's a lot, because they took a lot of trees over that time. They took a lot of minerals over that time. So that still has to be worked out. However, what we endeavor or seek is resolution by negotiation. Because if this continues in the courts, it will continue for a few more years. However, if we negotiate that settlement, we will start to see that much quicker. And again, that's all based on the amount of dollar figure on the resources that were extracted from the territory, and that would be determined by either court decision or by negotiation. So then we'll get a clear idea at that time, closer to that time, of what everybody will be entitled to, as well as communities. And there's one fifth question.
Hi, I'm Hayden Dishmakosh, and my question is, who has been speaking on Sagmook's behalf at the treaty negotiations?
Sagmook is very fortunate to have individuals who are very active and learned in the involvement in these discussions. I also acknowledge the community members, there are a good number of people who've been involved in these discussions and attending these information gathering sessions with the Robinson-Huron Treaty. And our representatives in these discussions and negotiations is, I still call him Chief Angus Toulouse. He spent some time as chief in our community. He also spent time as the regional chief for Ontario. And we also have Roger Jones. Roger Jones has a very strong, solid background in law, and he's always been involved in constitutional law for a very long time. So these are the two individuals who are involved in the discussions and negotiations with the Robinson-Huron Treaty on Sagamok's behalf. So again, that's Chief Angus Toulouse and Roger Jones for the legal. I'm just trying to be mindful of the time here. I see that we have a couple more minutes that we're going to be wrapping up very shortly, but I wanted to say to all of you here, I want to encourage you to learn and understand what the treaty is. Learn and understand who we are as Sagamok and Anishinaabeg. In time, you will come to understand and appreciate what many did for us before us. The ones who signed the treaty, what was the spirit and intent? Why did they sign the treaty? And we'll appreciate the protection of what we continue to exercise today in our rights to governance, to gather, harvest, hunt, and how we live together. We've always held up our part of the agreement. Encourage you as young people, and then you become adults, that you'll remember this. You'll remember who you are. You'll remember that treaty. And always continue to acknowledge that. Which
We have a little gift for you. Chief Resiliency.
We're 25 after 9. We're complete here, and back to you at headquarters.
Oh, Chimigwech, what a great discussion. Miigwech Okama, very happy you were here to join us. We do see our next chief here as well. And I know some of you have to leave, but we will be getting questions coming in from the chat, so we'll put those out as well. If anybody's here at the session, they can also answer. But Chimigwech Bidabin, that was great. So I just want to give out a shout out to some of the schools that are joining us, just to let everybody know we have over 70 joins this morning, and a lot of them are classrooms. So feel free to put your classroom in the chat, let us know, and we'll give you guys a little shout out. But we do see the grade 4 class from B. Dobbin, 3 classes from Wiki Junior School, so Ani, Wikwemko, Indigenous Support Office, and grades 1 to 8 from Alderville, so Ani. We also have the grade 2-3 class from Humphrey Public School, Miss Goggins' kindergarten class, Miss Martin, and Miss Roy's class. So Ani, everybody, and welcome. We're so happy you're here to join us. So next up, we are heading to our next school, Shawanaswe, with Ogama Shining Turtle. So we'll pass it over to you, Shining Turtle. Chimikwech, Ogama.
Good morning and welcome from beautiful Waskinaga and our Shawanaswe school. So I have some friends in my audience here, so I'm going to go around here. Can I get your name?
My name's Deacon.
Deacon, and what grade are you in, Deacon?
Grade 4.
Deacon's in grade 4. So behind me, your name?
Sophie.
Sophie, and Sophie's in
Grade 4.
grade 4.
My name's Brayson. I'm in grade 5.
Brayson's in grade 5, and over here.
My name's Layla, and I'm in grade 5 also.
And we're here to tell you that we're very proud Bobcats. So in our local school here, and we go from grade kindergarten or and grade 5, 6, and we also have daycare in our school. So, and our logo is, we're proud Bobcat, so if somebody wants to stand up and show us the Bobcat logo, that's who we are. So this is Shawanasway Kitamal Go Big. So we're excited to be part of the treaty discussion today. Oh, you can't hear me very well. Okay, thanks. Is that better? Is that better?
That's better, Ogama. Much.
Miigwech, yeah. It's we have a speaker here, so so we're excited to be part of this treaty discussion on Treaty Week. I brought some pieces in here to show you a little bit about who we are, so we'll share that with you. For our audience, the sacredness of who we are comes from, we got people knocking. Speak louder, is that louder? I keep getting messages. Can people hear me?
Yep, we can hear you now.
Okay, I have to speak into this mic. So we have sacred objects. They're not sacred objects, they're of us. So I'm going to share with the audience some of the pieces that I brought in today to help us, that people feel that are ancient and they're not. And so part of it is, this is the Shawanasway School Eagle Staff. So they have it for the school. And over here on this side, we have our Boaj Ged. This is our one of our community eagle staffs. And it's adorned with eagle feathers. I'm going to put on my weak wand, but inside the weak wand, which is our chieftain's hat, we put the names of all of our chieftains in here, as far back as we can remember, like as our memory goes. So we got Ogama, Shawanasway, Wabakekek, Bibamset, Naugabo, 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 McGregor, Naugabo, McGregor, Naugabo, and then Waskodeshiken, myself, the chief. So that's who we are. Our sacred colors, we have two sacred colors, and you see them on here, is the blue and the white. The white is the head of the water spirits because we're surrounded by water on the Great Lake. And the blue is the Thunderbird spirit, and that guides our activities as a community and keeps us whole. We use the eagle wings as part of our healing and in many of our meetings. We have the shakers that we use in different ceremonies, so that our ceremonies have not gone away from us. They're part of who we are. And you'll see drums. This one happens to be the drum that stays with me, and it's a sturgeon drum because of my clan. And then here, this is the pipe that's been used for a millennia. So even today, this one is called a Northern Chief's Pipe, and I smoke this from time to time for the community well-being, or for events that are occurring, or if I have questions that I want to speak to our ancestors about to get guidance and direction. So this is very much a part of who we are. It's not an ancient craft. It's a societal craft that we that's embedded in our spirit. So my name is Waskodeshiken, or the Shining Turtle. That's what the ancestors gave me. That's who I am. The English name is Franklin Bebamset. I don't really affiliate with that as much as I affiliate with the Waskodeshiken, because I come from the earth. So Whitefish River is also signatory to the treaty, the Robinson-Huron Treaty. But that's not where the story really ends. We were signatory to the Treaty of 1836, which was known as the Bondhead Treaty, or Treaty number 45 if you talk to the Crown, and the Treaty of 1862, the Manitoulin Treaty. So treaties are very much living instruments and relationships. So in our community, we, our leadership over those different periods of time felt it was important to have these treaty relationships conducted. So that tells you a little bit about who we are. So what we're going to do now is, I think we're going to take some questions. So who has the very first question that we can take? Okay. You got the first question? Okay, you have to speak into this box. Yeah, I'll hold it. Yeah, and you can speak right into it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Nice and loud.
Do we have our own place names across the territories before the treaties were signed?
So did everybody hear that question? Did we have our own place names across our own territories before the treaties were signed? And the answer is yes. And a lot of those names still exist today. So our use of the land came long before the treaties. And our relationship with the land is so significant that we had different place names for different locations. So I'm going to name some that we understand. In the Treaty of 1850, we talked about a relationship to Jibal and Aning. Jibal and Aning doesn't mean much to some of the audiences, maybe, except the Anishinaabe. That's called present-day Killarney. And it describes the way the water flows between the mainland, the North Channel, and an island just off of it. So Jibon and Aning was one of those, it's significant enough for us that it was in the Treaty of 1850 as a place. Another one was a place called Webajuwong. Webajuwong, for anybody that goes to the island, is the first place you come to. And that's called, you know that as Little Kern. And again, that talks about the currents in the channel as you cross the bridge there. Webajuwong is another important place. And over the course of history, Webajuwong was one of those connecting places, a port, if you will, for the movement of human beings and also goods in the trade. It was a very important trade place that was known to us. Another place is, you know this as a different language, but Kitchi Manitou Minis. What does that mean today to people? They call that Manitoulin Island. We didn't know it as Manitoulin Island. It was the Great Spirit Island. It had such significance and reverence that they called it the Great Spirit Island, Kitchi Manitou Minis. And that's been short formed over time. I still refer to it as Kitchi Manitou Minis. Some call it Manitou Minis. In our own community, Wagwaskinaga is another area that's known here in our area. And that talks about the reverence for the mountain tops here, the shimmering mountains that we have through the community. And then also we have a place called Wagwaskinaga, which is the islands, and they were filled with birch trees at one time. And over the change and relationship with settlers, those trees have disappeared. And another place that's known to everybody is where the treaty was signed, September 9th, 1850, Bao Ting. Bao Ting, and that's known as present-day Sault Ste. Marie, or we would call that a meeting place. So very important and sacred places. And each one of our communities, whether it's in Zgamuk or Thessalon or Tikmek Shing, all have place names that are really important. And so those are part of who we are, and they're part of our identity. And they're really important that we keep honoring and using those places for our well-being. So thank you for that question. Do we have another question?
Yeah.
Okay, I have Leila. She's gonna say the question nice and loud.
Why did our ancestors sign the treaties?
Yeah, why did our ancestors sign the treaties? I had to think about this for a long time, and I had to come at it from sort of different perspectives. I think, first of all, the reasons why we wouldn't sign a treaty is maybe more important. Why we wouldn't sign one would be not to bring any social, economic, and political devastation to our way of lives. So when we gathered at Baoting, or if we gathered for the Bondhead Treaty or the Manitoulin Treaty, we certainly didn't go there to say, let's devastate ourselves. Let's obliterate ourselves. Let's end our social, economic, and political structures. That's not why we signed the treaties. We also didn't sign the treaties so that we would sign away our way of life. We heard from the previous speaker, the chief of Sangamo, who talked about an interconnectedness and a sharing of societies. One of the challenges that is making this relationship maybe more rocky than others is that our worldviews coming in. The European came with a very linear worldview, a top-down approach, a king, a queen, a prince, and then subjects. In the context of where we are, we don't see it that way. We have a circular worldview. And that circular worldview means that we sustain ourselves generation after generation after generation after generation. And those two views don't always coexist properly. So I wanted to talk more about that, in that we understood that we had to share. Are we still connected here? So that's one of the reasons, from a worldview, you would probably get, there's probably three other perspectives when it comes to why our ancestors signed the treaties. Definitely the Crown would have their perspective, and their perspective was they wanted to get access to the minerals and the resources along the North Shore. That was their perspective, and it's very linear that way. It's scientifically based, perhaps, and it's compartmentalized. They didn't understand that by extracting minerals, that it would have impact on indigenous people, it would have impacts on the land, it would have impacts on the trees, it would have impacts on the water, it would have impacts on the animals. In a worldview that's circular, our people view all of that. They view all of that. One part affects them. So I hope that helps with that question. The next question that we have, do we have a third question? Okay, there we go. There you go, speaking for that.
What does it mean we are all treaty people?
So here's the question. What does it mean we are all treaty people? I want to approach this from the perspective of a statement I read by Chief Seattle. And it's one of the most spectacular orations about our connectedness on Turtle Island. One part of it says this: if we sell you our land, remember that the air is precious to us, that the air shares its spirit with all that life it supports. The wind that gave our grandfathers his first breath also receives his last sigh. The wind also gives our children the spirit of life. So if we sell you our land, You must keep it apart and sacred, as a place where people can go to taste the wind that is sweetened by the meadow flowers. What does this mean? We are all connected in this world. We are not in compartments. The drum is round. It's not linear. We start here, we go through, and we finish here. And this is what Chief Seattle was saying. We're all connected. And every piece, including the air, should be treated that way. So as we mean that we're all treaty people, we all have a responsibility to improving our relationships, to honoring relationships, to the sacredness of the air, the sacredness of the water. Everybody had drank water today or had water as part of their daily life. We also have to have food that comes from the earth, comes from the land. This is what it means to be all treaty people. It's not in a compartment. It's not on a piece of paper. That's the treaty. No, it's more than that. It's that it's all sacred and everything has spirit. Everything has spirit. And when we all understand that, when we all work towards that, that's what it means to be all treaty people. We went through that very, very important question. And we have a fourth question. Is that a fourth one?
Yeah.
Okay. The next one, okay. Your name and speak it.
How do treaties affect you today?
The question is, how do treaties affect me today? Everything that we do. When we got up this morning, we were all fortunate that we could all breathe life into our lungs. It starts there. We have to change our opinions on the air. We can't take it for granted. It's like Chief Seattle has said, the air shares its spirit with all of life. All. It's not meant for one group. It's not meant for one society. It's not meant to be put on paper. The air is for everyone. The eagle. The children. There are children yet to come. They enjoy that. We all enjoy air today. If that is so common to us, that it affects us all, then we should be celebrating together. We should be celebrating our connectedness. That the air is so precious and so sacred that it gives us all life and all a chance to take the next step, right? To take the next step about coming together. So how does it affect us today? It affects everything that we do. How many people had a shower this morning? How many people had a cup of water this morning? The water. The waters is so sacred to all of us that nobody, no nation can survive without it. So that completely affects us. Many people had breakfast this morning in one form or another. Much of that grain likely this morning that we had came from the Earth Mother. Shkakamakwe. That's how much it affects us, this relationship. And that's what the chiefs have said over time. It's a relationship. It's a relationship that is so sacred that we are not separate from one another. We're not in compartments. We are the circle of the earth. We have to remind ourselves that the earth is not flat. It's not linear. It's circular. It has volume. And it has stories. That's what's so important about how the treaties affect us today. On a practical level, any automobiles that you buy, the changing of money that you have, that all comes from the resources of the land. That all comes from the resources. The paper, this likely came from the mill in Espanola. But it didn't come from the mill in Espanola. It came from the trees that are in the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. And we need to remind ourselves about being careful about how much we remove. They call that an extractive economics. We have to protect that. So when you see the paper, see the tree. When you see the tree, feel the land. When you feel the land, you're going to feel our heartbeat. So I want to thank you for those important questions. We're very pleased to share our time with you. I don't know how much more time we have on the clock. So what I'm going to do is I want to thank our students at Shawanossway School. So we have Deacon, right? Who do we have here? Stand up. What's that? Sophie, yeah, who asked a really good question. We have our good friend here, Grayson, who asked a really good question, and Layla, who asked a really good question. They're very excited about this, and our students learning and feeling the relationship of the treaty, what it is to feel the land and the air, the wind, our heartbeat, right? You know, in Chief Seattle's sentence, he talked about the sweetness of a meadow flower. You can smell the seasons change. Fall is upon us, we're deeper into fall, and you can smell that. You can feel it when you're outside. That should be for everybody. And this is the interconnectedness. This is the circular relationship that we see. It's not so much on paper. Miigwechki bizindoya. Thank you for listening, and we wish you all the best. If there's any other questions, we can only try to help. Aha. Back to the live host at the RHW studio, live streaming.
That was fabulous. And Ani, to all the Shawanossway students joining him. We're so happy that we're coming live from all of our classrooms. Next up, we are just going to keep rolling here. Before I throw it over to Ogama Nuchtai and Atikmikshing, we are going to just give a quick shout out to a lot of the classes that are joining us. Our numbers are continuing to grow, and that makes us so very happy. I think we have over 100 joins now, so that's probably a lot of your classrooms. I'm happy you guys are able to make it. I know we had a little bit of issues with our links, so we're glad you guys joined our journey with us. So quick shout out to Assignac Public School, Miss Donnelly's grade 5 and 6 class, Ani, grade 3 and 4 classes from Shawanossway, as well as grade 5 and 6 from Shawanossway. Ani, we're so happy to have you. Grade 7 and 8 at White Pines, Ani, Anishna. Grade 5 from Isabel Fletcher, we see you out there joining our discussions. Grade 5 and 6 from Mac Tier, as well as grade 8 from Eastview. So we'll be hearing from you very soon. We can't wait to see you. But now we'll pass it over to Ogama Nuchtai in Atikmikshing. Ani, Ogama.
Good morning, everyone. Ani Buju, Nimid Makwa, Nadishnakaz, Mong Ndoram, Atikmikshing Ndunjaba, Gama Atikmikshing Nishnabek. Good morning, everyone. My name is Craig Nuchtai. I'm the chief of Atikmikshing and Nishnabek. And I just want to welcome you from Atikmikshing territory. I'm not in my office right now, actually, due to COVID. We are working virtually from home. As most of you know, COVID has, has been tough on all of us, even in the schools with the students having to work from home. But I'm excited to still be part of this and to provide some information and some insight into what the treaty means to Atikmikshing and Nishnabek. And Atikmikshing is a Ojibwe word for Whitefish Lake. So if you hear the term Whitefish Lake First Nation, it means Atikameksheng. And our current reserve boundaries are just outside of Sudbury in Whitefish. But I'll speak to that a little bit later. I wanted to share some insight into what the treaty is. And before we do that, though, we have to understand that what a treaty is. And in order to understand the importance of the Robinson-Huron Treaty, which is the treaty that all of us, or the majority of us, are in right now. And a treaty is basically an agreement between two nations. And there's a key word there, nations. And I say that because most of you, the kids and teachers and everybody else on this session, understands that Canada is a nation. But there's also 21 other nations that are signatory to the Robinson-Huron Treaty. We are a nation. Atikameksheng is a nation. And to understand what a nation is, by definition, nations have a history that is unique to them and also shared with neighboring nations. We have our own ethnicity, which means our own type of people. In our case, we're Ojibwe, is similar to a lot of our other Robinson-Huron nations. We have a unique culture, which means we have our own traditions, we have our own ceremonies, we have our own unique way of looking at this life that we all share. We also have territory or land. So each of the signatory nations that are part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty occupied the land that is made up of Canada right now. So we had that. But one of the most important things that a nation has is its own language. And in our case, in the Atikameksheng, we have the Ojibwe language. And we share that language with our signatory nations. So we do that because we trade, we barter, we need to communicate and understand with each other. And so I wanted to make sure that everybody here understands why a treaty was signed in the first place between the British. So before there was even Canada, the Robinson-Huron Treaty existed. Before there was the province of Ontario, the treaty existed. So the treaty, predates the formation of the federal and provincial government. And when those two governments were formed, they willingly and knowingly took on the responsibilities that are outlined in the treaty. And that is what we call a fiduciary responsibility. And that means that basically they have that responsibility to live up to what's written in the treaty. So that's a very important thing that we have to understand about the treaty. And the treaty it's a legal agreement between two nations, like I mentioned earlier, and so did Ogama Aswamniki and Shining Turtle. We, as chiefs, we understand this. This is the foundation for all of the work that we do for our nations. We have to uphold that treaty. So that's what guides us in our discussions with our council. So our council members are elected leadership, just like similar what the federal and provincial governments do. They have an election to select their leaders. We do the same thing. We follow a set of guidelines. So now going back to the Robinson-Huron Treaty, that was signed in 1850 on September 9th in Bawating, that's near Sault Ste. Marie. And so the group of chiefs gathered with Mr. Robinson, and they came to an agreement because they understood that there was a need for us to work together so that we could coexist, cohabitate. because we knew, as Anishinaabe people, we knew that there were valuable resources in the land. Although we had placed more an emphasis on being in harmony with the land, only taking what we need, only harvesting what's provides sustenance for us to make it through, and we didn't take more than we needed, and that was the balance that we lived by. That was our spirit as a people, was we lived in harmony with the land. So, but we knew when the European, the British, and the French came to our territory that they wanted to access these resources. And so we came to an agreement. And that's what the Robinson-Huron Treaty is. It's an agreement of how we're going to live together. How are we going to prosper together? And that's really important to understand, is that the intent, the spirit of that treaty was basically to make sure that everybody who lives in this area is going to prosper, is going to be healthy. We're going to take care of each other. And that's really important to understand. And I say that because right now, the treaty is not being upheld. The treaty is by our federal and provincial partners. And that's what we are, we're partners. Canada has other treaties too, with the United States, with the United Nations, and they do their best to uphold those treaties. So it's like saying, Canada is not living up to our treaty, and we don't understand why they're doing that. So it's up to us as leadership to make sure we hold them accountable to it. And the same thing for the average everyday Canadian person. You are a signatory. You are a treaty person as well, and it's up to you. So that's why I'm very happy to be here today to talk to our future leaders, because you have a responsibility to ensure that everybody is going to prosper from this treaty, and everybody can. We're in a legal claim with the courts to determine how much resources are actually being developed in the Robinson-Huron Treaty. And so as you get older, you'll understand the importance of, Ogama Shining Turtle was talking about, the paper coming from the trees from the Robinson-Huron Treaty, right? So the resources are very valuable, but we have to take care of them. And that's, again, what the treaty is about, taking care of the land and taking care of each other. And so that when the Robinson-Huron Treaty was signed, it was Chief Shawanakizik from Tecumseh who signed for our nation. And he's my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. And so at the time, he traveled to Sault Ste. Marie and signed with his son, Chief Mongowin. So we also had a different traditional governance system back then too, where we had head of families that met together and we had one chief who spoke on behalf of those families. So he went and signed. And why did he sign? I think of that too. I think of why would he sign? And I really thought he was thinking of 7 generations ahead. He was thinking, okay, I need to make sure that the families, the children, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they're going to be protected. They're going to have everything they need to survive. And he felt that this treaty would provide that safety and that security. And so he signed it. And what it did was it provided for, they call it annuity payments. So it's a payment to every individual in our nation on an annual basis, so every year. It also provided protection for our rights to hunt and fish and gather together, to grow our medicines, to continue practicing our traditions and our ceremonies. It also set aside land specific for our use, for the sole use of Atikameksheng. And back then, when we signed, it was described as Shawanakishik and his band, a tract of land now occupied by them and contained between two rivers called Whitefish River, which is when you look at Lake Huron, Whitefish River comes up, but then it turns into Vermilion River, and Wanapateseke, which is Wanapate River, and then 7 miles inland. And they mean 7 miles inland from the northern shore of Lake Huron. So that if you look on a map, that's quite a large area. And unfortunately, our First Nation, our reserve, was the only reserve that was not surveyed. So a survey is basically when they go in, they map out a location or a lot, and then they put it on a map. And unfortunately, our First Nation was the only one that wasn't surveyed. So, and it wasn't surveyed until 34 years after the treaty was signed. So right now, we're actually in what's called a land claim to have our boundaries, our true boundaries, acknowledged and respected. So that's the current status for Atikameksheng. And why is the treaty so important to us? It's because we need to benefit from the treaty as much as Canada and the province. And we need that because, for one thing, we need a school in our community. We need a school that teaches our language, because our language is being lost. It's, if you think of in Sudbury, what if there were no schools or money available for schools to learn your language and your history? Well, eventually you're going to lose it, because you're not being immersed in it. You're not being taught it. So it's the same thing for our language and our culture. So we need a school, for one thing. And in order to get a school, we need money, we need funds, we need support. And the treaty is designed to provide us that. So that's why the treaty is so important to us. And right now, there's so many other things that we have issues with our health services in our communities. So anything that you can think of any type of service that's available in Sudbury, like hospitals, grocery stores, anything like that, we need the same things as well. But we also need the support to get those. So that's why the treaty is so important. It protects us. It defines it. It clearly states that we are a nation. We are just like Canada. We are at the same level. And so we are fighting to be treated as such. So that's what the treaty means to us. As a descendant of the chief who signed our treaty, it's my responsibility to uphold the treaty as well. So that's my job, and that's what I'll continue to do with the support of our community members. Now, there was a couple of questions, and one of them is, what happened if someone didn't want to sign the treaty? And I thought a lot about that too. I was thinking about our chief when he signed it, and I thought, what did it ever cross his mind to not want to sign the treaty? And I think if someone didn't sign the treaty, then for whatever their reason was, in terms of let's say the land being taken away, it shouldn't happen, or it shouldn't have happened, because what the Canadian courts affirm is that we had title to land. And so if a First Nation didn't sign the treaty, then their land shouldn't be taken away, because they didn't agree to it. So they still have rights to determine what happens on that land. And court cases in Canada prove that. So if someone didn't sign it, then they have the right to determine what goes on in their lands. So it's as simple as that. It's like Canada, not wanting to sign a treaty with another country. well, that other country can't come into Canada and start doing whatever they want. It's because they didn't sign the treaty. So it's the same principle here. And the second question is, can a treaty be taken away? And no, it's simply no. A treaty is, right now, there's a lot of court cases to define what the provisions are or to clarify things, but a treaty can never be taken away. It's here. And that's a wonderful thing for everybody, because it guarantees that we are to work together, to prosper. And that's the beautiful thing about this treaty. Canada and our nation and every other nation who are treaty partners, there is more than enough resources for all of us to live together and prosper, to be healthy. And really that's, again, the spirit of the treaty. And, I keep saying, we're in these court cases, but I really wish the federal and provincial governments would sit down with us like they did, in 1850 and discuss this and come to an agreement that says, okay, you know what, I'm going to make sure we do our part to take care of your family and vice versa. So that's what I wanted to share with you all, that the treaty, is a good thing. It's a good thing for everybody. And as long as we do our part to make sure we all benefit, then let's do that. Let's work together. And as the future leaders of our province, of our communities, even, future leader of Canada, I ask you to think about that. Do we really want a person or a nation to not benefit from this treaty? And I believe deep down you don't think so. So thank you again for listening to me. And if there's any other questions, please feel free to ask me, and I'll do my best to answer them. Miigwech.
Oh, miigwech, ogamanuchtai. That was a great presentation, and we were so happy you were able to join us this morning. And Ani and Anishna, to all of our Nitais and Intikmikshing and Anishinabek. That was a great presentation. If we do have any questions come through, we'll make sure to get them to Ogama Craig. So now we're heading to our next school. We're going to be answering some questions live from Eastview Public School here in Sault Ste. Marie, Bawating. So first and foremost, we're going to introduce our Gimas who are here with us live in studio. So I'm going to pass it over to Ogama Sayers and Ogama Rickard. So take it away. Miigwech, so happy you guys are here with us.
Anin, Kinuaya, good morning. Ogama Namadagojing Gurakasat Dijnakas, Jijak Dodam.
Ani Bojo, Nawabagijik Dijnakas, Ganzi Bidonjba, Namedo Dam, Jubinishnabe, Minua, Mushkego, Minuach Lakin Dao. Good morning, everybody.
Oh, good morning, and we are live here in Baoting, and it's an honor for myself to be able to be here to field some questions and share a little bit of insights in regards to our relationship that was struck a long time ago, but it's really not that old. Our relationship with the settlers that came to these lands, and in particular we're going to talk a little bit about the 1850 treaty. And by the way, it was signed right here in Baoting, and if you really looked at a map you would see the Great Lakes, and the center of the Great Lakes is right here. And if you looked at North America, you would see that the Great Lakes are at the center of North America, or what we call Turtle Island. And we consider this to be the heart of our mother. The heart of Turtle Island is here in Baoting. And we've been in this proximity since creation started. This is where it began for us. And we've been here as caretakers of our mother's heart since we were placed here as a people.
Absolutely. So I think this is, to reiterate what Chief Sayers just kind of spoke about, I think it's very valuable, again, to talk about some of these things. And, you know, obviously commending the staff at the Robinson Huron Treaty Secretariat to organizing Treaty Week. And I do welcome everybody that's, logging in from the classrooms, from the comforts of your home, to talk about these much needed things that Chief Sayers brought up. I think he mentioned that this area is very important in relation to some of the historical things that have happened here. And, as treaty partners, as I sit side by, a fellow Ogama, historically, that relationship has always existed prior to Canada becoming a country, right? So again, it's nice to have an opportunity to speak about some of these things, to speak about the treaty itself, to speak about that relationship to our brothers and sisters that were also signatories to the treaty. And it's also nice to hear from the other chiefs, the other Gamas that have spoke before us that talked about the importance of their area, the significance of their ancestors that were part of those important times for our people. So I understand that we have a set of questions and some discussion that we're going to be taking part of as we move forward throughout this conversation. I'm looking forward to that. But again, I'm not sure I'm not sure if we start to move on to some of the questions or not. But again, looking forward to what everybody has to say. Miigwech.
Yeah, no, that's great. We do have a first video question. We're just going to test it to make sure you guys can hear. So Barrett's going to play a video question from one of the Eastview classrooms.
Hi, my name is Zoe. I go to Anna McRae Public School in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. My question is, what happened if someone didn't want to sign the treaty?
So that was Emma, and she was asking, so what happens if someone doesn't want to sign the treaty?
Emma? Good morning, Emma. Thank you for the question, and thank you all. Do you want to give it a shot?
Sure. Well, I think so. That's part of some of the the issues back in the day of 1850 is that there were some chiefs that from communities of representation that weren't present, right? So obviously, I think they had some challenges back in the day of 1850 when the signatories were asked to sign on the Treaty of 1850. So I think those are just probably some long-standing historical things that were present at that particular time. I think what happened is that they were kind of included somewhat in this process, and for us, I think that's part of the problem. I mean, that's part of the problem that we recognize here as Indigenous people within our communities is that we always do things in a good way from our perspective, right? We always are very committed to that relationship of building off of that, partnership, that meaningful partnership between communities, between nation and nation, of upholding our responsibilities. Over time, I think it's been said that it's not so much the case for the other side of the table again, right? So we're speaking to these things and we're bringing light to these things, and that's actually a good question because it brings to light about that meaningful relationship, right? So I do know that there was challenges back in the day, and I think that's part of that hesitation, that uncertainty, especially when you're on your land, you're with your people, you have an abundance access to the fish, the wildlife, the food, our lands. And then when you have settler people start to make their way into our traditional territories, it begins to caution a lot of our leaders back in the day. And I wasn't alive, obviously, back in the day, but I just know that from some of the stories that are passed on from generation to generation, there was always those questions, those uncertainty of our people at that particular time.
Miigwech Gima, thank you, Chief Rickard. And just to maybe add to those wonderful words that the Chief just shared, we as a people have inherited, just like somebody might inherit their grandmother's house when their grandmother passes away. We as a people have inherited the obligation or the responsibility of looking after the land, including the trees, the plants, the animals, the moose, the fish, the water. All of those things are what we, as the original people of these lands, inherited. And when we were starting to talk about this new relationship, a lot of our people weren't comfortable in entering into these really, important and powerful relationships. And there was resistance, there was reluctance. At the end of the day, the way we understood the treaty was that they wanted to legalize the removal of copper from our land. So we remember that. Our elders continually remember and tell us it was only about taking some of the natural resources off the land. There's nothing in the treaty about imposing a mainstream educational system, health system, legal system, policing systems. All those things were never a part of the original treaty. So because there was these discussions that were happening and they wanted us to surrender, we never surrendered. There was never a war. There was reluctance. Even Botswana didn't want to sign the treaty because it was a compromise, and the settlers really didn't take us seriously. So we were ready to walk away, and so was Garden River. We were the last out of the 16 chiefs that signed. Botswana was number 15. So we are Botswana First Nation Reserve number 15. And that's the way it is in the treaty. At the end of the day, we finally supported the treaty with caution. But on our lands, there was other bands that never made it to Sault Ste. Marie. Other bands, meaning groups of people, groups of families that lived on the land, never made it and were never a part of. So we have to find a way of being able to accommodate and recognize what they've still maintained in the relationship with the settlers. And it takes a lot of education like we're doing today and talking to the new governments on our land, the Canadian government and the Ontario government. Thank you for the question.
So I think just to kind of add on what Chief Sayers mentioned, I know speaking to elders from our community, Chief Sayers brought up a good point about, at the time of the treaty, the oral history that we have from some of our elders in our community is that it wasn't always necessarily the truth, or in terms of the interpretation at that particular time in terms of our Indigenous languages, right? So when they were talking with settlers in relation to the treaty, it wasn't necessarily, translated in a way. There's that communication issue with our nations and the settlers, right? So again, I think there was just a lot of things there that were unknown at that particular time. And from our elders, what I'm hearing from some of our elders is that it wasn't encompassing in terms of all the things that we understood it to be in relation to that agreement. And when we signed off, obviously it didn't encompass the true meaning or the true understanding of what we were signing on to, right? So, I mean, you can look at that on many things, as well as when you have, say, for example, the federal government, say back in the day, I know my father mentioned a lot of times when you would have officials from Ottawa come to the communities that was predominantly Indigenous first language community, and you have somebody talking from a legal perspective of all these federal legal jargon that they're trying to get our communities to sign off of. Our people are not obviously inclined as much in terms of the English language, right? So one of the things that was kind of at our disadvantage is us being Anishinaabe, having our own languages, and it's not being correctly interpreted in that sense, right? So I think there's a little bit of misconceptions or misunderstandings in terms of how some of those agreements came to be. Because again, I hear from our elders is that, at the time of the treaty, there was a lot of things that were said or not said that didn't result in some of those things that should have been enshrined in the treaty, so. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. We do have some questions coming in from Eastview School, so from a classroom. So I'm going to, Baird, if you can switch to Eastview class. And I'm going to try to put my speaker on here. Can you put it louder so they can hear? Okay. Baird, it'll be Susan's class. You can put her on.
It's not letting us start our video here.
Okay, Eric will help you there. I can hear you though.
Okay, it's okay. Try it again. Oh my God! It's the co-host asked you to start. Okay, it's for some reason it's not starting the video, but you can hear us.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, I have a student here. If that's okay, we'll go ahead and I'll see if I can figure out what's going on.
Ani Riley Dishnikaz, and my question is, did the treaty give us any rights that we already had?
Okay, thank you, Riley. What the elders told me was that we were here on the most part, but when some of our villages in the area made their way to Treaty, they came in these in canoes. And when we came in our canoes, they were full, these birch bark canoes. They were full of everything that we as a people were given by the Creator, including our language, our law, the moose, the deer, the fish, the trees, the land. All of those things were in our canoe, and we went and we shared with the new people to our lands. We gave them certain things. We gave them certain rights. When the settlers were arriving, they came in their tall ships and their boats, and they really rode really high in the water because they didn't have much in their boats. And we gave them a few things, but at the end of the day, what the elder said was that, guess what we had in our boats, in our canoes, when we left Baoting, when we left the Sioux, we went back to our villages. We still had all the animals, we still had our language, we still had our culture, we still had our land, we had the trees, we had the moose, we had the fish, we had the deer. Whatever we had when we went to treaty, we still had it when we left. We never gained anything at the treaty. It was us that gave treaty rights to the new people on our lands. And the elders say, we didn't get any treaty rights at the treaty. We gave them treaty rights. We came away with what we went there with. So we didn't really get anything out of the treaty other than an expectation that we'd be able to live and use our lands and resources as we're in the habit of doing. So basically what that meant was that we could continue to do what we were doing on our lands, and that we would continue and start this new chapter of sharing with the newcomers.
Absolutely. Just to feed off what Chief Sayers mentioned, I think it's reconditioning our minds, to think that we got something out of it, but it just reaffirmed obviously the things that we've always known to be. And I think that's the case when you look at today's things as well, is that we just need to believe that we can do what we need to do within our communities that we feel is right for our people, whether it be it's creating our own laws, whether it's creating our own courts, whether it's creating all these things that we know that we have the capability to do within our communities. So when you look at treaty and the things that were guaranteed in that particular document, Chief Sayers is right in terms of the stories from his ancestors and his elders about it was letting the settlers know that these are the things that we're allowing you to do within these lands. It wasn't more so for us because we already had an abundance of opportunity. We had obviously the access to all those things that we know are ours from a Anishinaabe perspective, right? So again, things, that relationship in terms of how things were perceived, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, that still pertains today, because I think they're trying to evolve it in a way where they're letting us do these kinds of things, but we just need to believe that we've always had that right. We just need to recondition our minds that a little bit differently of how our people have, been, forced to try to think like that. But if we know that we've always been here since time immemorial around these lands, well then we have the right to do these things in order to protect our community members, to provide for our members, all those kinds of things. So it's a different way of thinking of how the treaty and how we're discussing those matters of the things that were enshrined in the treaty. We just need to spin it a little bit in a different way, and we need to breathe life into looking at from our Indigenous perspective, our worldview in relation to these kinds of things, because it's still applicable today, and we're still going through those challenges today with the feds or the province or various things like that. Is we are the stewards of this land. We should have the final say in all these things that are happening within our traditional territories.
Okay, Miigwech, I think we have another question coming from the East View class.
Hello, my name is Ethan, and I was wondering, can treaties be renegotiated?
Yeah, well, so that's a good question, Ethan. I think that's a very good question. I know that the treaties that we signed obviously was the signatories of all those communities that were involved in the Robinson Treaty treaty area, but it also represented the other nation of Canada at that particular table. So when you're looking about some of those historical things that we've already sat down with the government to develop these treaties, it's a little bit of I guess, of a difficult conversation to have because it's between the two nations, and I would think that we would need the consent and the, obviously the willingness from the communities, from the treaty partners that signed on to this particular treaty. And I think when our elders actually sat down and they actually sat down across the table from the feds or the government of Canada at that particular time, or some of those people that were responsible for setting these things, I think they were very obviously forward thinking in terms of our leadership. You think back of the day, we didn't have internet, we didn't have various things like that makes it easy for us to access information or to communicate with our neighboring brothers and sisters along the Robinson-Huron Treaty area. So when you think about the things that they thought ahead for the future generations, it really blows your mind, because they were thinking 7 generations ahead. They were thinking, when we're talking about the annuities case, I mean, they talked about, ensuring that we have those things to protect our communities that would, that would compensate our members for the resources that were extracted within our areas, right? So again, to be at that particular time negotiating these things, thinking about obviously those generations ahead is very very beautiful to see, because it just shows you the strength, the power, the smartness, our leaders being very ahead of their time in terms of how they were able to think about those things at that particular time. So when you talked about, again, renegotiating the two, I know it's a long-winded answer, but when you're talking about renegotiating the treaty and things like that, there's obviously much to do from a legal perspective if that was the case. The thing that I've been talking to with a lot of the younger chiefs is about, modern day treaties, not just between the feds or the province or government, is just modern day treaties with their fellow brothers and sisters along our area, which is the North Shore, right? Is just how do we breathe life into some of those things that we've established historically between our nations, between our communities, to strengthening that relationship between each other, right? So I know from my perspective as a Gama from Garden River, we definitely want to look at how do we, breathe life into those sacred arrangements that we've had with other communities, with other nations in relation to strengthening that relationship amongst each other. So moving forward, I'd like to explore that as our community, working with other communities on some of those things that are very important to our people. So I don't know, Chief, if you have anything else to add there.
There is no word in the language for treaty in our Anishinaabe and in our Ojibwe language, and what the speakers tell me is that the closest word to that is Wawende Maugiwin, and that's, you see it written behind us on the board here, that's promises. So when we made these promises and maybe talk with the new people to our lands, those promises were made in witness of all creation. So everything around us watched these promises. And what the elders tell me, that there's always opportunity to renegotiate, but we aren't open to renegotiation. What we're finding with the settler governments is that they don't like the terms of the promises that they inherited. And what we say is, well, suck it up. That's the way it's going to be. We're not renegotiating. We maintain this treaty that we have in this area. If this treaty, or these promises that we made to each other, fall, or if they fail, if there's no more treaty, guess what happens in this area? From Thunder Bay to Nipissing to the Severn River, all that land and water completely returns to the jurisdiction of the Anishinaabe, completely returns to us. Our law, our schools, our health systems, all of those things revert back to us. That's what happens if we were to renegotiate. I don't think Canada would have an appetite, or Ontario would have an appetite to renegotiate. And we don't want to renegotiate either, because we have a really great opportunity through an interpretation of our treaty to maintain or get to a really good quality of life for our people, which was the original promise, is that we would have the same quality and benefits that everybody has on our lands, and we wouldn't be treated less than. That's a challenge, but we're not going to change the treaty just because it's not rolling out the way it should. But we'll make sure it rolls out the proper way in the future. So yeah, thank you.
So just to kind of feed off of what Chief Sayers mentioned, is that if you look in modern day times, the issues that we deal with as Gamas here within our communities, you see those kinds of things still try to happen to this day from either the federal or provincial government of trying to erode our treaty rights, right? Because they know that the agreement that they signed back in the day was a good one. Our leaders know that, you know, again, when I talk about their visionary of thinking about the 7 generations ahead, they were really mindful of that. And again, you can just imagine the wealth of knowledge that they had back in the day without having all the access to all the wonderful things that we have now to communicate with fellow chiefs and other communities. So just to think about what they were able to vision and see in the future, what we needed for our communities in relation to signing this treaty, because you look today, they're continuing to try different ways to erode some of these things in relation to the treaty, because again, there's some fiduciary responsibility there on behalf of the federal and provincial governments. And like Chief Sayers mentioned, I mean, you know, if we do away with the treaties, well, then that allows us to have complete access to all these things that we said we'd share with them, right? So again, it negates some of those things that Chief Sayers brought up there, but it also, you know, speaks to the realities of what we're dealing with today. That's still an underlying systematic thing that's happening in government, is eroding or trying to erode the treaty rights. So, you know, we think about, you know, these things happened long ago, you know, that things, you know, they've done things a little bit, you know, where it was pretty, you know, aware of how it was happening, of the intent. But you look today, it's not so out there. They do it systematically through the law, through the courts, through different channels that we might not necessarily, you know, it might not be so obvious. But for us as leaders, that's why we have to bring on the capacity in terms of our own lawyers, our own governance specialists. We have to bring on our elders to sift through all this kind of stuff, because it's a different strategy now to ensure that we uphold the treaty, that we strengthen the treaty, that we always speak to the importance of the treaty, because there's always ways that we're trying to, again, from our partners on the other side, there's always a way to try to remove themselves or remove responsibility as signatories to that treaty, right? So I just wanted to kind of add that in there in terms of a modern context of what's happening today that's still relevant of what happened 200 years ago.
Okay, miigwech, Gama. We have one more question from Susan's class, and then we'll have a few more online. So we do have a question coming in from Susan's class, and then Ocean and Papar will be next if they're waiting online. So take it away, Susan. Miigwech.
Anin zibi dishnakas kitakan zibi donjiba makudarem nishnaveda. What can we do better as youth to learn more about our treaty rights?
So one of the things I think is just being here today, present, right? I mean, the more that we have various organizations like the Robinson Huron Treaty Secretariat, the more that we breathe life into having Treaty Week, you know, stating the importance of you know, those historical events within our communities. I think just being present and asking these questions and just listening to some of the words that we're sharing with you is a good first start. I think from a community-based perspective, as well as you look for Garden River's perspective, is one of the things that we're trying to do is establish our own JKSK elementary school system, because we understand the lack of curriculum in relation to our own education, our own Indigenous education within the schools. And that's always been a challenge for our people, is that, you know, sometimes we're not at those tables to determine what our kids are learning when they come to whether elementary school or high school or places like that. We want to sit at those tables because we have an obligation to remind the other nations that we need to tell that side of the story. We need to talk about residential schools. We need to talk about our own leaders. We need to talk about the treaty. Because I think when we're looking at the challenges that are happening within Canada, whether it be demonstrations that you might see on social media or the news, you know, you're always wondering yourself, well, I wonder why that's happening. Or you have people from non-Indigenous communities saying, well, I wonder why that's happening. And if they don't know, then it's hard for us to have any chance of a meaningful relationship or reconciliation between settlers and non-settlers, right? So I think when you're looking at those kinds of things, it's really important and valuable that you continue to learn as you go along. And again, I don't know what the curriculum speaks about in your own school of Eastview or wherever you might be logging on from, But I think that's one of our priorities as GIMAs, is to ensure that our Indigenous worldview or lens is taught in the schools, so that our kids have somewhat of an understanding of the foundation that they belong from and the communities that they belong from, and they know, the proudness of knowing who their chiefs are, who these people have been, why they're so important in relation to their community, or the overall process of how they're able to secure some of these things for their families, right? So again, I think just being here, being present, asking those questions, I think that's one thing. And I think obviously taking it upon yourself as well. There's a lot of good research out there. There's a lot of good information out there that speaks to some of these things about our communities, about our leaders, about our treaties, all those kinds of things. So part of it is our responsibility as individuals as well, right? So I just remember as a young kid, sorry, I might be taking a little bit too long here, but I just remember as a young kid being in your position at a young age, and I grew up with a lot of my own family that were involved in politics, right? And so that was around me. And so I would read a lot of books about our history, or I'd read a lot of books about our own community, and I'd ask my papa or my grandma or some of my older relatives about some of the things that were important in our community. Why was Garden River named Garden River? What was, where were some of the important areas, or the well-known areas in our community? Who was Chief Shingwak, and who's his relatives, and what happened at the treaty? I think it's just, asking those questions, because, I think that's part of the things that's going to strengthen us as individuals, is knowing who we are and knowing our connection to our communities and to our people, which would really, benefit us as you get older. And I think the more that you know about yourself, the more you know about your community and our people, I think the more stronger you'll be when you get into positions as GIMAs.
Okay, great, Gimaz. So yeah, we do just have two more questions from online. One's from Ocean, and he's asking why the treaties were made. And then we'll have one more question from the grade 7 and 8 class at Eastview. So I know you guys are heading to recess soon, but maybe you guys can just hang on for us. So take it away, Okamas.
So before the treaties were even signed in the area, we as a people got together, and really something magical was happening. We, as a people, really see life from a different lens. We look at life and creation in a different way. And we have this ability to communicate with our ancestors, or people that have moved on to the spirit world, or people who have passed on. And we have this ability to talk with and communicate with the animals. We've kind of lost track or lost that ability, but a lot of our people still do that. So we talked with our people that lived in the spirit world, and they told us there are going to be these new people that are going to be coming to your lands, and they're going to be coming here in these big canoes that are going to be pushed by the clouds. And we didn't really understand what that meant. But when these big ships came here and they had these tall sails on them, we knew that that was one of the prophecies that we would have to recognize, because there was other prophecies that were also told. They said on those big tall ships there was going to be these people that were going to have two faces, which again we're thinking, how could people have two faces? But what we understood that to be was that there was going to be people that are going to come here, and there's going to be good people and there's going to be bad people. We had to befriend or be friends with the good people, and really be careful of the ones that were not so good. So we also had to remind them that we are the people that were going to be in control here. We are the sovereign. We are the leadership on these lands, and that we would find some space for them to share with them. And it was from that perspective, because treaties are not just here between Indigenous people and Canada. Treaties are actually international instruments, are promises that are made between nations all around the world. Even for us as Indigenous people, we had treaties with the Lakota, we had treaties with the Haudenosaunee, or they call, more modern, they call them Iroquois Confederacy. We had treaties with many nations, as do Canada has a treaty with the United States. Britain has a treaty with France. So treaties really spell out how we're going to live side by side. So treaties have always been really important to us. Agreements on how we're going to share, how we're going to live in company with each other. So that's basically how I envision treaties. They are something that are really important in how we evolve as people.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned earlier about the way, you know, of obviously because our communities are evolving in relation to our relationships with each other. And one of the things that Sarah spoke about is just having treaties. It wasn't just treaties with Canada, it was treaties with other nations, right? So again, when we're moving into a modern day context, we're looking at ways to solidify our relationship with other communities. And one of the things that I talked about with other Gamas is having a treaty. You know, why can't we develop these modern day treaties with our communities to, you know, to ensure that we have that meaningful relationship with each other, whether it be, you know, focusing on a joint effort to, say, combine communities in relation to economic development, or say a political treaty, or you know, various things like that we know that's going to strengthen that relationship between our communities, other than just being, say, a part of a tribal council or a political treaty organization. I think we want to get down to the nitty-gritty of having these actually items and breathing life into those political things that we've always had in our people, right? So I think to just kind of tap onto what Chief Sayers mentioned is that those are very important things today that we, and still serve relevance today, that we want to breathe life into again and figure out how do we do those things in modern day context, right? Because there is that need to, again, develop those meaningful relationships with our communities.
Oh, Chimigwedge, that's great. What great questions we're having from our students. So we do have one final question from Bryn Tebow, grade 7 class at Eastview Public School. And her question is, what do you feel is the most important element of the treaty?
I guess for me, the most important element of the treaty is understanding what a treaty is. Treaties are a recognition of nationhood status, that as a people, only nations can enter into treaties. So when you're a nation, it recognizes that you have your own land, you have your own law, you have your own people, you have your own way of life. All those things that are centrifugal are centered to being a nation. So we entered into those relationships with different countries, France, England, and that's what, for me, is that recognition. And if we entered into a treaty with Britain, they cannot unilaterally say, oh, you're not a country no more, or you're not a nation no more. And sometimes we have to remind Canada of that hold on here, Canada, we didn't sign a treaty with you. We signed a treaty with Britain, and you promised Britain that you would implement their promises when you decided that you wanted to be a big boy and be a country and manage yourself. You can't unilaterally say, oh, you're under our constitution now, or you're under Canada. We're not under Canada. We're above Canada in international governance systems. So in Canada, what you're taught in the schools is that Indigenous people are Canadian Indians, but it's not that way at all. We are a nation that have our own rights, and we have our own governance. We have our own systems. We have our own promises that we have to fulfill in our first treaty with the Creator. So there's a lot of work that has to happen in education to actually get the reality out there, the true understanding of what a treaty is and what's important in those relationships.
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that, Chief brought up some good points, but I go back to, again, our leadership back in the day of just being very, forward thinking about those particular pieces that are in the treaty, because they knew that generations ahead that there's going to be challenges with more settlers moving into this country, and so we needed to protect some of those things that sometimes we probably couldn't fathom. Well, why do we need to state it in the treaty? Well, I think, but because they thought that, they knew that there's going to be an influx of, to Chief Sayers' point, is there's going to be an influx of settlers moving into these areas, which would obviously, make things a little bit challenging for our people that were living here in these areas, right? So again, when you look at those particular sections of the treaty, I think back to how visionary they were, and to ensure that these things were identified in the treaty to protect our people and our communities, in the future. And again, you just look to today. I mean, you look at the agreement that, even though it happened in 1850 in terms of the treaty, you look at governments today, they're still trying to figure out a way to remove themselves from the treaty obligations that Canada had signed on to, right? So again, that the agreement that we've signed on long ago, including all those aspects that were determined and agreed upon by the chiefs or the signatories, were very impactful, because even to this day, we have people on the other side trying to, again, erode our treaty rights in those particular areas, right? So every one of those areas, and I might have missed your question, but I think I'm kind of understanding where you're getting from, is that all aspects of the treaty is important, because again, you see that happening today with those kinds of things that are happening systematically from the other side in relation to the other government. Big much.
Okay, great. So that was our final question. So I just pass it over in case you have any closing comments, and then
Sure. Well, I just want to say miigwech. I do want to say, it's always an honor to talk to our young minds. I've always said that in order for meaningful change to happen in this country, whether it be just understanding or education, it's to tell our side of the story, and to speak about these things that we know is to be truth within our communities and our people. The only way that we're going to change, those relationships in this country. Sorry guys, some technical difficulties here. It's just to provide these kinds of opportunities. So I definitely want to commend Cher, Nikki, a few other friends over here that make this happen, right? Because I think to that young man's point about how do we continue to, what can we do as our part? It's just taking part in these conversations, and the more that we're able to work through these entities, to have the awareness of the importance of the treaties, of our communities, of some of these things that are happening or always been a part of our communities, I think that's the first step to make meaningful change within this country, right? So again, I do want to say kudos to the teachers as well. You're the ones that are in those driver's seats of shaping these young minds. Please be considerate that we have two very strong communities that are in this area. And by all means, call upon us. We'd love to come sit there with your classroom. We'd love to be in those boardrooms at the various school boards to talk about meaningful ways that we're going to enhance the quality of education for our kids from our communities. Because again, we need to tell the story of the significance and the importance of this area in order for us to move forward in a good way. So again, I don't want to take up too much time, but I do want to say miigwech. I want to say miigwech to all the Gimas along the North Shore of the Robinson Huron Treaty Secretariat that took part in this day, and I always look forward to Treaty Week because it opens up a lot of eyes, I'm sure, and it continues to facilitate that ongoing discussion that needs to happen today. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Gima. So I want to thank all of the students for joining us, and I do want to say one thing in regards to treaty. You're going to start to wonder, I want to look at this treaty. I want to see what it says. I heard Chief Sayers or Chief Rickard talking about education, health, all those litany, all kinds of issues. And you're going to look in a treaty and you'll say, oh, it's not there, it's not there. But it's not there because it was never negotiable at treaty time. We still had those things. We only put in there what we wanted to share. So the way the Canadian government looks at that is, if it's not in the treaty, by default, they control that stuff, but that's not legally correct. That's not correct at all. Actually, if it's not in the treaty, it still is within our realm. It's still within our jurisdiction. So start to question things that you're starting to hear. If it doesn't seem right, ask the question. Ask your teachers. Ask people throughout your whole life. Ask questions. Don't just take what you hear as the truth, because there's always different ways of looking at things. And as Indigenous people, what I found in my growth growing up through elementary school, high school, was that a lot of the things that I was taught wasn't really the way it actually happened. It was somebody's version. It was his story. Ask us about our story. and you'll really be enlightened. You'll feel good about what you're hearing because it'll make more sense to you. So look at education and question education. And when you notice differences with some Indigenous people, maybe they're wearing a sweetgrass braid or they're wearing some beadwork, compliment them or ask them what that means. Don't make fun of them. Don't hurt each other. Ask questions. Be open to different ways of life out there, even in your schools. Let's try to be really kind to each other in all of the schools, every class, every grade. Let's do the best we can to be really beautiful human beings to each other. But until we do meet again, on behalf of my people from Badjunong, from Botswana here in Baoting, Chimigwech Kibajaya, have a really great afternoon.
Great, miigwech, Gimas. So I just have a couple of closing comments. Can we do them there? Come over here. I just have to say a couple things here. Sorry, guys. Give me the little hook. Okay, Ani, great, miigwech. Well, that's getting to the end here of our primary treaty talks with tomorrow's leaders. I do have a couple shout outs to give to the schools who are joining us. So yeah, let's give it up for Lockerbie Composite School. Many members of our team here in Robinson Huron Treaty are graduates, so go Vikings. So we're happy you guys are here. Also the grade 3 at HM Robbins Public School. Students at St. Mary's in Massey, Mrs. Huff's class, and Bovington's grade 5 class. So awesome, we're so happy that you're here to join us. I know Gimas Sayers mentioned the treaty, so if anybody's looking for the treaty, you can find it on our website, wawindamagawan.com. And this has the original text of the treaty, as well as the treaty in Anishinaabemowin, as well as our interpretation, so feel free to check that out. Don't forget our treaty tracks, our activity books for all of our students. We have been sending them to school boards throughout the territory. If you haven't received yours, please feel free to reach out to us. And we have more treaty talks coming up today, so I encourage you guys all to join us. We are having our secondary session starting at 12:30 today. We had to move it up a little bit just due to some of our high school schedules. And we're going to be going live from Eastview High School, so I invite you guys all to come here. We're going to be hearing from Georgian Bay, Perry Sound High School, with live with Ogama Pewis. We're also going to be going live and talking to Wiki High School with Ogama Pelche. And of course, we'll be here again in Eastview with Ogama Sayers. So yes, please come back, and we're so happy you're here. And also, if anybody missed the videos, they will be uploaded on our website within the next week or two. Always available for viewing, sharing, showing. So miigwech, we're happy you're here, and we hope to see you soon. Bamapi.